Welcome back. I'm Ian Masters, and this is Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. And joining us now is Nelson Lichtenstein, who's a distinguished professor in the Department of History at the University of California, Santa Barbara, where he directs the Center for the Study of Work, Labor, and Democracy. He's the author or editor of 16 books, including a biography on the labor leader Walter Reuther and State of the Union, A Century of American Labor, Achieving Workers' Rights in the Global Economy, The Retail Revolution, How Wal-Mart Created a Brave New World of Business, and The Right and Labor in America, Politics, Ideology, and Imagination. And he has a recent article at the Los Angeles Times, No Rail Strike for Now, but Workers Aren't Done Fighting. And his forthcoming book is A Fabulous Failure, The Clinton Presidency and the Transformation of American Capitalism. Welcome to Background Briefing, Nelson.
Glad to be here.
Well, thanks for joining us, Nelson. And I spoke to you at the time of the rail strike, which didn't happen, but it was all about the fact that the railway workers are overworked because they've cut the workforce to the bone. And the reason that they were about to go on strike was that they wanted at least to have some days of sick leave. And the freight rail companies, like Norfolk Southern, the one that's involved in the derailment in Ohio, didn't want to give them any sick days because they need them to work every day because there's so few workers. And this 150-car rail train that derailed in Ohio, spilling toxic chemicals and forcing the evacuation of a small town of East Palestine, is an ongoing scandal, and it seems to be getting worse and worse as we learn more about the environmental damage done. So here you have an example of what happens when you have a depleted workforce, a long rail car with only two people on this entire train, and it's just an accident waiting to happen. So what do you see connections between that rail strike and what happened with this derailment of this train?
What the railroads have done for the last 10 years or so is a kind of a hyper-efficient plan, which in effect just involves, I think they had a special name for it, I think efficient railroading or something of that sort. It involved really cutting the workforce by about a third, and having the workers sort of on call almost all the time. The issue of sick days was just the kind of the tip of the iceberg. People were presumably sympathetic to people having to go to the doctor, but it was more than that. It was any time off. That the amount of time off that the workers had was limited. They were getting good wages and overtime and things like that, but nevertheless they really didn't have enough downtime, and so you have these extremely long trains. And with just a few workers, two in this case, and it just in theory you can do it, but in practice, things happen, unexpected things happen, and in this case, you got this incredible derailment, and which creating a kind of environmental disaster. You need a certain kind of regulation of the railroads, which is, of course, as American as apple pie. We've been regulating the railroads since the 1880s. This needs to be renewed, and the strike or the potential, the strike that didn't happen was one element of that, but clearly it goes way beyond that. I mean, railroads, like the internet, like telephone service, these are an essential, really utility, which countries have to make sure they work.
Well, you were referring to what's called precision scheduling railroading, PSR.
Yes, thank you.
A management philosophy that those that advocate it argue uses technology to improve efficiency. But on the other hand, the workers say it's just an excuse for cutting staff and lack safety practices and shoddy maintenance or lack of maintenance to pad corporate profits. And Norfolk Southern is not the first and only rail company to implement PSR.
Yeah, there's been a consolidation of the railroads over the last 10 years, just to a very small handful who really run the operation. Meanwhile, they've been making enormous money because of the imports from abroad, and during the pandemic, lots and lots of think people wanted things rather than services. So they've been doing very well. And then, they cut the workforce by a third and didn't have to, on their labor costs were reduced. So they've been doing extremely well. And it's an industry that calls out for a greater degree of regulation and supervision, especially given the fact that now with the infrastructure bills, there's going to be a lot of money put into shoring up railroad infrastructure, and in response to that, the government does have the authority. Now it's easier having the authority, and is one thing, but actually doing it, and in some cases it requires congressional action as well to enhance regulation. And so there are kind of some veto points here between the impulse for a greater degree of regulation and actually doing it. One of the funny things going on here is some of the Republicans have jumped in. I think Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley and a few others, normally quite right wing, and have sort of criticized the Biden administration and Buttigieg, who's head of Department of Transportation, for not doing enough, and I find this interesting at the very least, whether they will consistently take this tack, because it is something that the Republican Party has not heretofore been on board with. That is greater regulation of an industry in America, historically the Republicans have not been doing that. But this certain wing, a small group of Republicans who really on the right wing, but who claim, or they want to have their perception be that they are the vanguard of a Republican Party that seeks to be a quote working class party. They have made these statements, partly demagogic, to denounce Biden and Buttigieg, but I don't know we'll see how far it goes. I have the feeling it won't go that far, but we'll see. Yeah.
Well, the letter you're talking about was from Senator Marco Rubio and J.D. Vance of Ohio. They sent a letter to the Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg on Wednesday, demanding more government oversight of the U.S. freight train system. And the letter questioned how the derailed train's 3-member crew was supposed to take care and monitor 150 rail cars, a number of whom had these toxic chemicals, vinyl chloride, which is at the source of this terrible environmental problem in this small town in Ohio after the derailment. And they also went on to accuse the Biden administration of prioritizing efficiency over resilience in its national infrastructure and transportation systems. And also Representative Ilhan Omar has weighed in with similar complaints to Buttigieg. And Buttigieg is saying, great, finally you guys are talking about something that I've been talking about and that I want to deal with, but I can't because I'm constrained by Congress. And specifically, though, this is, I think, the important point here, that, and Buttigieg pointed this out, that the Transportation Department doesn't have the ability to regulate the rail system, and they're constrained by law due to the Trump administration's 2017 withdrawal of a rule that would have required the installation of electronic braking systems on trains carrying flammable and hazardous material. And electronic braking, as opposed to the air brake systems, which are over 100 years old, would mean that had that train had the electronic braking system as the axle came loose, they could have braked the train electronically. So you don't have that concertina effect where you start braking and then all the ones in the back sort of just pile into the ones in the front, like dominoes, and then they somewhere along the 150 car chain, the cars break loose and are derailed. That's what happened. Greater regulation requires some congressional action. I mean, the politics of this, and really more than the politics, it's sort of a kind of almost an ethos that if these Republicans are serious
about wanting the base of the Republican Party to be a working class party, I mean, then they're going to have to break with decades and decades of Republican, tradition. What defines the Republican Party as the Republican Party? That is, it's a pro-business party that has been very light on the regulation. And I mean, I rather doubt that will happen in the long run. By the way, the resiliency versus efficiency, that's interesting, because in Texas we've had these disasters on the electric grid, which has been shown not to be resilient during these cold snaps. Maybe it's quite efficient. It is efficient if it all goes well, because then you don't have redundant systems there. And certainly the Republican Party of Texas has not been pushing for any sort of a resiliency in that situation, and that's where Ted Cruz is from. But this political moment could be interesting, and when you have these spectacular disasters, which are clearly affecting a small town in undoubtedly a sort of Trump country there of Eastern Ohio, we'll see what happens on that one. I'm a little skeptical as to how far this will go.
Well, apparently there's every year 4.5 million tons of toxic and hazardous chemicals are shipped by rail in this country. And as even as the letter from Marco Rubio and J.D. Vance to Buttigieg says, how could you have a 150-car train with only 3 members of the crew? And they've already gotten rid of the caboose as well. So this feels like this is an accident waiting to happen.
Yeah, it was, and by the way, I mean, yes, this is that's taking place. We're also seeing, for example, in Silicon Valley, the same kind of deregulatory ethos is creating all sorts of dysfunctionalities, and Tesla just had to withdraw, I think, over 300,000 cars because their automatic driving thing isn't working. So, I mean, there's a kind of a chaos that is generated when you have a deregulatory capitalism and a very short time span in terms of investment, and kind of you want to get your money in and out as soon as you can. And I think that the railroads, which again was kind of an ancient staid industry in America, over 170 years old, nevertheless, a kind of go-go mentality in its management ranks in the last decade or so has generated these kind of dangerous situations. The infrastructure program does need, I think, you can't just hand out the money. You do have to sort of plan where it will go and where we best put, and that of course does involve a certain amount of cooperation and with private enterprise. And so, Buttigieg isn't I don't want to let him off the hook. He does need to. They need to jump into this in a very aggressive way. You can't just sort of hand out the money. I think one to the degree we have an industrial policy in America, and I think we do have a de facto industrial policy. That used to be a phrase that was a no-no phrase back in the Clinton and Obama administrations, but we have it. What that means, it means an element of planning, and planning means a certain amount of coercion when it comes to business enterprise. You can't just invest in helter-skelter wherever you might get the quickest return on investment. And I think we're seeing in the railroads would be, so we need to return to the progressive era of over 100 years ago, when the railroads were in fact heavily regulated, both in terms of safety and in terms of rates.
Well, in terms of responsibility that Norfolk Southern is taking for this environmental disaster in the small town of East Palestine, they've offered up $1 million. And then there was a town hall meeting Wednesday in this town, and Norfolk Southern refused to show up. And they cited dangers to their physical dangers people are obviously angry, but, at the town hall meeting, only the local officials, they couldn't answer the questions, and the crowd were yelling, "Where is Norfolk Southern?
Yeah, right.
Where is Norfolk Southern?" So,
Well, this has the potential for being a not just a public relations disaster of enormous size, but really that gets translated into a tremendous impulse toward this regulation. I mean, this $1 million is a laughably small amount. I mean, if people really are injured by the chlorine gas, I mean, you're talking about $1 million for each individual who, at the very least, who has suffered some medical malady. I mean, that's a ridiculous. We're talking about somewhere in the billions. I mean, it's like these disasters in the Gulf of Mexico and the oil spill, or in Alaska. These are you're in the billions when you have these kind of disasters. And what you need is, I mean, you do need effective prosecution of these firms, because the only way that corporate managers will seek to be responsible is when, in fact, the consequences of irresponsibility are, shown to be monetarily, enormous. And so I think we're on the first stages of this, of a long-term, conflict here between the company and the government and the individuals who've been harmed.
And the Railway Workers United Union, they're saying that this derailment in Ohio is a result of rail industry cuts to inspection staff, limitation of safety protocols, and that the East Palestine train was hurried by this PSR regime that they have, and that it appears the train was not properly inspected since an axle broke. And again, as Pete Buttigieg is pointing out in response to criticism from Senators Marco Rubio and J.D. Vance, it was the Trump administration in 2017 that withdrew a rule that would have required the installation of electronic braking systems on trains moving hazardous chemicals and flammable materials.
Let me mention one thing. This points up the need for strong and aggressive trade unions, because even if that rule had been passed by Congress or something, the Republicans are right in this. An army of bureaucratic inspectors, is not enough to ensure the safety, or simply obeying the law by millions of business enterprises, and especially big ones. What you need, when you have a strong union, they're on the job. They know what's going on, and when they can make their voice heard and make it clear. And in fact, what in some places you do have it, the right to refuse to work when you find safety different problems. This is what you need. And I think one of the tragedies of stopping the rail strike in late 2022 was that a moment where the union would have been in fact strengthened enormously by this strike, and the public perception of that would, I think, also have been quite good, and that was forestalled by ending the strike. I think it was very short-sighted on the part of the Biden administration in many ways.
Well, Nelson, I'm afraid we've run out of time. But before we end, I just wanted to mention that there are more than 20,000 rail workers during the year 2018 to 2019 were laid off. It was the biggest layoff since the Great Recession. And the nation's rail force has gone now to 200,000, its lowest level ever, down from 1 million at its peak. So you can see how the labor force has been eviscerated. I thank you for joining us, Nelson Lichtenstein.
Great to have been here.
And again, I've been speaking with Nelson Lichtenstein, who's a distinguished professor in the Department of History at the University of California, Santa Barbara, where he directs the Center for the Study of Work, Labor, and Democracy. He's the author or editor of 16 books, including a biography of the labor leader Walter Reuther, and State of the Union, A Century of American Labor, Achieving Workers' Rights in the Global Economy, The Retail Revolution, How Wal-Mart Created a Brave New World of Business, and The Right and Labor in America, Politics, Ideology, and Imagination. And he had a recent article at the Los Angeles Times, No Rail Strikes for Now, but Workers Aren't Done Fighting. And his forthcoming book is A Fabulous Failure: The Clinton Presidency and the Transformation of American Capitalism. This has been Background Briefing. I'm Ian Masters, and I'd like to thank producer Graham Fitzgibbon. And to help us sustain this program into the future and assure it remains free to all, please take a moment to support us by going to backgroundbriefing.org/donate or publictruthmedia.org, where you will find our non-profit Public Truth Media Foundation, where your tax-deductible donations, large and small, keep us broadcasting. And if you missed any of today's program and would like to explore our vast archives, you can find us at backgroundbriefing.org, where we'll include extended interviews searchable by topic and have made it easy for you to sign up for daily email updates that provide links to resources, articles, and books discussed on the program. Also, you can find links there to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and we also encourage your ratings and reviews on these platforms. Find us on Twitter and Facebook at Ian Masters Media, and please do help us reach more listeners by sharing this program with friends, family, and colleagues. And I'll be back again on Sunday with another Background Briefing at backgroundbriefing.org. Bye for now.
The guy that lived next door in 305 took the kids to the park and disappeared by 9:30. Who'll ever know how much she loved them so? That dark night alone in America. A quiet voice was saying something to me. An angel song about the home of the brave in this land here of the free. One time, one night in America. And the other became a car. A car skidded into the rain, making the last little one to say, one more light goes out in America. A young girl tosses a coin in the wishing well. She hopes for a heaven while for her there's just this hell. She gave away her life to become somebody's wife. Another wish unanswered in America. People having so much faith, die too soon, well, all the rest are made. We write a song that no one sings on a cold black stone where a lasting peace will finally break. Sunlight plays upon my window pane. I wake up to a world that's still the same. My father said to be strong, that a good man can never do wrong. In a dream I